Hello, Shadowcat back, and today I don't want to do this video. I really didn't want to do this video. I was supposed to do this last week, and the reason I need to do this video is in the wake of the 3 shootings that just happened. We had Buffalo, New York, Uvalde, Texas, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, the Tulsa one is still fairly new. I don't have a lot of details on that one, but I'm pretty sure that everyone so far has heard at least of the Buffalo and Uvalde shootings. And of course, all 3 of those have brought to bear all the old arguments. Mental health, guns, all these things. And the thing that frustrates me every time this happens is the fact that I listen to the arguments. Of course I listen to the arguments. I follow the news. But whenever we hear these arguments, number one, not only are they the same every time, and they're obviously not working, but none of them actually address the root of the problem. See, there's a reason why on my channel I don't talk about the news. And the reason for that is because 2 reasons. Number one, there are 1,000 other channels you can go to if you want to follow the news, okay? I'm subscribed to several of them. I can recommend a few. If you want a few recommendations, let me know down in the comments. I will give you recommendations. So, if someone else is already doing it, why should I bother? The second reason, however, is because anything that's already happened, we can't do anything about, okay? It's a bit like saying, you know what? It's going to rain today, but I already planned my picnic. And so, what am I supposed to do now? Well, did you have a contingency plan? Did you bring an umbrella? Do you have an awning? Whatever you were going to do, your time for planning is done. Now you have to deal with what's happened or is happening. And at that point, your options become very limited. I prefer to look further ahead. Well, we have more options. You can say, I'm going to have a picnic a month from now. Perhaps I should have multiple venues set up just in case. This is why I don't cover current events. But with these events that just happened, there's one thing that no one has been talking about. Or if somebody has been talking about it, I haven't found them yet. In each situation, we had a person with a gun who went and murdered people. In Buffalo, it was a grocery store. In Uvalde, it was a school. And in Tulsa, it was a medical center. So 3 different people, 3 different locations. The reasons for them were also different, and also really, really hard to understand. For example, in Buffalo, the person that did the shooting was talking about racial politics, replacement theory, things like that. In Uvalde, well, we don't know because that kid's dead. We can make a few guesses, but we're never going to know for sure. And I don't think they've actually released anything from Tulsa. I don't think they've even released the name of the person from Tulsa. Or if they have, I haven't been paying enough attention and I don't have it. It honestly doesn't matter, however, for the point of this conversation. So we can bring up racial politics, okay? Well, I believe 2 of them were white, 1 of them was black. So is it a racial thing? No. How about politics? Okay, well, the person in Buffalo was a leftist. The kid in Uvalde was not affiliated. I mean, I don't even know if he was old enough to really vote. He might have been barely old enough. I don't know that he ever actually did, though. And again, Tulsa, we don't have that kind of information. So is it political? No, it's not. Could it be religious? There's been no account that it's religious, so that's out too. So what do they have in common? Well, all of them were done with guns. Okay? And that's why you have people on the left who are screaming that we need to ban the guns. Because they think that if we can simply ban them, make them illegal, then it will stop, which obviously it won't. If making things illegal stopped them, then we wouldn't actually need laws because the things would just stop. So that's not going to work. We also talk about mental health and how we need to have better mental health services. Well, as far as I understand it, we actually have pretty good mental health services. I mean, you can go pretty much anywhere in the country and find mental health services. You can go online and find mental health services. You can find communities. You can find professionals. You can find anything that you want. All you have to do is just do it. Reach out and get the help. And hell, if you look at a lot of videos, especially on like YouTube, sometimes you will have a little thing that's put on the bottom of the video that says, if you need help, call this hotline. Especially when there's like a big topic of suicide, that gets plastered on the bottom of every video. And it says, here's the suicide hotline. Sometimes even if you're not even talking about it. In fact, the fact that I just said it means it might get plastered into this video. I don't know, we'll see. So mental health is not going to be the issue. Or at least, a lack of access to mental health is not the issue. So what is it? What is the problem that no one is talking about? I'm going to get to that right now. When I started doing these videos, it was because I wanted to talk about things that nobody else was talking about. Okay? The things that get overlooked in the shouting. Like a child standing there in the kitchen while mommy and daddy fight. Both of them are so wrapped up in each other that they don't even see the child standing there. And that's why I like to talk about different philosophies. The very first video that I did was on empathy. And I did it on empathy because empathy is the root of all things. If you cannot even empathize with somebody, then you have no chance at having a society. I mean, if you cannot empathize with the people in your own household, you can't have a family. If you cannot even empathize with the people living left and right of you, then you can't have a community. Or if your community cannot empathize with the other communities around it, then you can't have a city. It is the fundamental basis for all of human civilization. We have to have some kind of empathy for each other. And that was the entire point of that video. And recently, I heard the most wonderful encapsulation of this. Now, I dove into the etymology of this a little bit, trying to figure out exactly where it came from, but it's one of those cases where it's so ubiquitous and so old that whoever said it originally has long since been lost to time. It's a bit like saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. It's not actually something Einstein ever said, but since that's what everyone says he said, it's been understood that that's where it came from, and most people don't know the difference. Anyway, I digress. The phrase it here, make sure I remember this exactly right. It is an African proverb, supposedly, and it states, "A child not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth." And when I heard that, I was just like, whoa, that's so perfect. Because I've been talking about this for years, and I've never been able to simplify it to that extent. But it is exactly that problem that we have right now. I want you to think about something for a minute, okay? Now, if you live out in the country, and I grew up out in the country, then you probably live on several acres of land, and maybe you have neighbors that you can see, maybe you don't. But if you live on a road, unless it is a dead-end road that is all your own, I promise you have neighbors. You will have one neighbor to your right down the road, and you will have one neighbor to your left down the road. Do you know who your neighbors are? What are their names? How many of them are there? I mean, how many people live in the house? Do you know? Do you know anything about them at all? That's important. What if you live in the suburbs? Okay? So if you live in the suburbs, you probably have 4 direct neighbors. You probably have a neighbor to your left and right. You probably have a neighbor across the street from you. And you probably have a neighbor behind you. Do you know who they are? Do you know their names? And I want you to think about this really, really clearly as I go through these. So if you live in the suburbs, who are your 4 neighbors? Now, why don't we go one further? What if you live in a windowless apartment in the middle of the city? Let's say you're in the middle floor. That means that technically, you could have a neighbor to your left and right, someone across the hall from you, someone behind you, as well as a neighbor above you and below you. That is 6 neighbors. Do you know any of them? And the sad thing is that as I ask this question, I don't know how many people are actually going to listen to this video, but I would bet that the majority of you who are listening to this video don't know. I would bet that the majority of people have no idea even what the names of your neighbors are. Now, I'm guilty of that one too. I am not a particularly social person. Not that I can't be. I mean, I can hold a conversation with just about anyone on a variety of topics, but I'm just not terribly interested. And that is admittedly something that I've been working on. I even used to joke, not to get too friendly with the neighbors, you may have to eat them someday. It's still funny. However, it is a little bit depressing. Point is, no one really knows their neighbors anymore. We are not a social community anymore. And that right there, I do believe, is the root of all problems. Now, I'm going to take you back for a minute. We're going to go back to the golden age, the 1950s in the U.S., with suburb communities of pastel-painted houses, rows of picket fences, cookouts on the back patio, you know, that picturesque scene from, I don't know, any variety of movies. I'm thinking Edward Scissorhands. That scene right there, when you get like the pan over of all the cookie cutter houses and everything. Was it a particularly thrilling time? No, it was not. However, it did come with a great deal of social cohesion. And why was that? Well, there's a few reasons for that. Number one, there was still a large emphasis placed on religion. And that's important for a reason that I'm going to get to in a minute. Number two, there was a large emphasis put on family. Now, those 2 things right there, those are things that are important, and more importantly, they are missing in today's society. First thing I want to touch on is going to be religion. Now, I am an atheist. However, I call myself a Christian atheist for a reason. And that reason is I do not believe in God. However, I do believe in Christianity. The fact is that if you were to just throw 1,000 people on an island and just leave them there, the odds of them actually surviving and building anything, I don't know, it's not great. They might get their stuff together and they might pull it off, but they need some kind of direction. And inevitably, somebody in that group is going to stand up, take charge, and they're going to start organizing people. The question here is, the person who stands up and takes charge, what kind of person will they be? They could be a good leader. They could also be a tyrant. So, whoever that person is, if you get the latter one, then yeah, you're going to have order because every single person who disagrees is going to get beaten. You're basically going to end up with a might makes right and rule by the strongest. It's not great. No. I think a long time ago, humans realized that if we are to thrive, then we need to have an order that is based on something besides just strength. And this is the cynic in me right now. But I think that the first people who came up with the idea of religion knew that, and they knew how to exploit people. And I feel confident saying that because if you look at many religions around the world, they still do their damnedest to exploit people. Usually it's okay at the smaller level, but I mean, take a look at the Vatican. The people that are supposed to be, lifting up the impoverished, the sick, the needy, and everything is covered in gold. Yeah, anyway, the reason why religion was so important is because it gave people higher purpose. It wasn't so much about you and just you, but it was also about being the best you and what you could do for the community. The idea that if we all came together, we could do more than we could alone. And so, given a God who was always watching, a list of commandments of things that you should or should not be doing, you now had a basis for your society. And since you had a group of people who all agreed on these things, who all knew each other, who were able to help keep each other in check, and who all shared the same moral values and principles, you had a peaceful civilization. I know what you're thinking. You stop thinking that. Yes, I know we had the Crusades. Stop it. It's different. The point is that when everyone was pulled together, everyone had common purpose and values, and everyone knew each other. These things did not happen. And I can say that going back to times like the 1950s, when there was still a great deal of focus on the home and the church. Now, how does that relate to what we have going on here? Well, the fact is that when we had a community built around the home and the church, the neighborhood, the community, all of that, when everybody actually knew each other, things like this couldn't happen. Not that they were technically impossible. However, in the case of the Buffalo shooter, we know that he was on the warpath because of things like replacement theory, racial alienation, various things like that. He had a manifesto. I haven't read it. I don't care. I'm only going off like the Cliff Notes version I heard a week ago. The fact is, he was a person who didn't have a community. Or if he did, it was a very small and not good one. He lacked any kind of neighborhood, family, anything. So, number one, when he started going down this path, there was absolutely no one to pull him back from it. Okay? There was no one to say, look, I get what you're saying, I understand your concerns, and I think we should work through it. That didn't exist. Secondly, when he did start to go off the deep end, no one could do anything about it, because no one even knew it was happening. See, it used to be that in the community, when everyone knew each other, if somebody was in a bad place, you would hear about it. Rumor, gossip, these things got around. Or if a child was caught breaking windows, well, you would know who the child was, you would know who their parents were, you could go and address that directly as well. I mean, there's a reason why during that time you had these memes, these references to, it's like, I saw what you did, I'm going to tell your parents, and be like, oh no, don't do that. I'm going to get my ass beat. So, those were safeguards that we had in place. You couldn't necessarily really get away with anything because you would get caught. Everyone knew who you were, everyone knew where you lived, everyone knew who your parents were. Now, whenever somebody starts going down that route, Uh, no one knows the person. No one wants to speak up because they don't know who this person is. Even if they did try to speak up, who are they going to speak up to? They don't know where they live, don't know their families, don't know anything about them. Without the community to back this up, then there's no safeguard in place. There's nothing that could have been done ahead of time. That is the first thing that should be stopping all of these shootings. We are the last safeguard. And that's why one of the things that I love is, if you've ever seen the movie V for Vendetta, and I don't know if it was ever in the graphic novel, but V addresses the nation of Britain, talking about how the government got to be the way it was. And the most poignant part of that entire speech is when he's talking about the guilty parties. And he says that there are those who are more responsible than others, and they will be held accountable. But if you really want to know who is responsible, you need only look into a mirror. And that's why I come back to community. See, the real guilty party in all of this, in Buffalo, in Uvalde, in Tulsa, it's not the gunman. Okay? Nutcases have always existed, they always will exist. And obviously it's not the gun. Especially in the case of Uvalde. In Uvalde, the shooter ended up locked inside of a room with a whole bunch of children. And he just started shooting them for fun. However, take away his guns and give him a hammer and lock him in a room with a whole bunch of students, and he still could have brained 19 of them. The gun is a tool, no different than a hammer, a saw, or a drill. And you cannot stop these things from happening by banning guns any more than you could stop it by banning hammers, saws, and drills. So let's just take that little nugget right there and put it right out front. Banning guns will do nothing. Even if you could wave a wand and make every single one of them in the world disappear, it will do nothing. We will simply go back to the days of swords and axes, and people will still die. No, what happened was, this kid went off the deep end, and no one in his community tried to stop it. Supposedly, his parents knew that this kid was out there. And maybe they tried to do something, maybe they didn't. I don't entirely blame them, because they're his parents and they're the ones that most likely knew. I know that he was living with his grandparent, his grandmother, I believe. And interestingly enough about this case is she was the first victim. Now that right there goes to show you that even community can't stop some things. Parricide, I think it's parricide, is extremely rare. Like, even if you go into wild animal communities, the children do not kill their parents. I mean, cannibalism is extremely rare in the animal community. And they definitely don't hunt each other. So for him to go ahead and shoot his grandmother like that before he went on the rest of the rampage, that right there is a sign that there are some things you can't stop, or some things you can't fix, rather. And he probably should have been institutionalized a long time ago. But again, that comes back to community. If his parents knew about this, and they didn't do anything about it, then that's on them. But what about the neighbors? Okay, what about family, friends? What about anyone else to come out and say, this is a danger to the community, we need to do something about it, and by the way, parents, we're not walking away from here until we have a plan. That conversation never happened. And so, nothing was done, and this is what happened. We can even talk about fortifying schools. And it's not going to stop everything. It'll help. But, I mean, I graduated in 2004, which means that I was in elementary school in the early 90s. And I remember my school. It doesn't exist anymore, so you can't go look it up. But I went to Maple Ridge Elementary School, and I remember that school. It was a pre through sixth grade school, okay? Class sizes were anywhere from about 10 to 30 people at the max. I was part of the biggest class that school ever had, I think. And I think the biggest school was like 32. I pity the teacher. But anyway, there was only one classroom per grade. We had a gymnasium. There was no auxiliary room, so during gym time, it was a gym. But it was also the music room, and it was also the movie room, or whatever you want to call it. It was the everything room. Oh, it was also the cafeteria. It just did everything. To give you an idea of how small this school was. And by the way, this school was on a corner lot. It did not even have a chain link fence around it. Any student could have wandered off at any time. And, every once in a while we kind of did. And then we got in trouble for it afterwards for, doing it. But the point is, in terms of security, there was, it was a long building. So there was doors at either end. There was, of course, the front entrance, the back entrance by the gym. So that's 4 that I can think of off the top of my head. Did these things happen then? Nope. Why? Well, I'm going to go back to what I said before, and I'm going to keep hammering this point until I make sure it sticks. Back in the early 90s, we had a much, much greater sense of community than we do now. I lived out in the country. I had 2 neighbors. I knew who both of the neighbors were. Now, one of them was a trailer, and it changed hands several times, but we always knew who the neighbor was. And they, of course, knew their neighbors, and so on and so forth down the line. I asked you earlier in this video if you even knew who your neighbors were. The same thing could be asked of your neighbor. Do they know who you are? And who their neighbor is? And go down the line like that. If nobody in the community even knows who each other is, then when you get a kid like the Uvalde shooter, and something happens, maybe you catch him, murdering small animals, who are you going to talk to? What are you going to do about it? Technically, it's not illegal to murder a squirrel. It is a sign of a greater disturbance, though. So you can't exactly call the police, but who do you tell? How could this have been stopped? The fact is, it fell on the community, and the community dropped the ball. Nobody knew him. Nobody knew what he was doing. Nobody knew what he was thinking. And so when he decided to act, nobody could respond either. Now, I also bring up the Tulsa shooting, and that was at a medical center. And again, I don't have a lot of details in that one. I don't know who did it. I don't know why they did it. But the reason why I brought all of this up, and I wanted to make reference back to my video about empathy, is because of this. Not only is it the community's responsibility to deal with people like this before they can act out, it should also be absolutely unconscionable to do these things. And I want you to think about something. Think about your own family, okay? You have a mother and a father. You might have siblings. You might have aunts and uncles. You might have cousins. Now, I want to take somebody... Oh, that was loud. I want to take somebody from your family, put them on the wall. I'm going to give you a gun and tell you to shoot them. Okay? And I want you to think about that. Think about somebody in your family. They're on the wall. You have the gun. I have told you to shoot them. Now, I would wager that almost every single person, unless it's like a stepfather or something, is going to say, no, I'm not going to shoot someone in my own family. Why? Because it's unconscionable. Why? You would never do that. It is something that it so grossly violates your sense of morals and principles that you simply would not do it. That's a good thing. Because that then grows. Who are your neighbors? Do you know your neighbors? If you know your neighbors, and I put you in the same scenario, putting your neighbor up against the wall, would you still pull that trigger? Okay? Now, if you live out in the country and only have 2 neighbors, then, that's 2 people that you wouldn't hurt. If you live in the suburbs, that could be 4. If you live in that windowless apartment, that could be 6. 6 people that you know well enough and have a great deal of empathy for that you simply would not hurt. Now, what about those people? They're going to have neighbors too. What if they knew their neighbors and would also refuse to pull the trigger? Because you don't hurt people that you know that you have empathy for. And this continues to grow and expand outwards until eventually you have a whole community that knows each other, that they have empathy for each other, and they would not hurt each other. And suddenly you end up in a situation where if you had somebody who was going to run around in that neighborhood shooting, would they shoot people that they know and have empathy for? And suddenly you look at scenarios like the Uvalde shooting and say, why would this person go to a school and kill these kids? This person had no empathy for these children, or the staff, or the parents. Didn't know them, didn't care about them, and thus could do anything that they wanted to. The disconnect is what allowed this to happen. The same thing goes for the Buffalo shooter. Now, despite whatever racial politic garbage was going through his head at the time, the fact is, he went to that store and he started shooting. He didn't know anyone there, didn't care about anyone there. They could have been paper targets as far as he was concerned, except they were moving targets and then possibly more fun to shoot. I don't know. But the fact was that empathy never crossed his mind. That is the root of the whole problem here that no one is talking about. It is the root of everything. We live in a society right now that does not have empathy. It has become so atomized that there is no cohesion left whatsoever. Now, that cohesion used to come from the family. But what have we done to the family? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to blame feminism on that one. Because it was the feminist movement that came out and said, we don't need to have a family. We don't need to put this on women. Women should not be expected or forced to be wives and mothers. And while that is technically true, they went so far as to actually turn it into a weapon of war against the family and said not only should you not have to, but you in fact shouldn't. And so now we had families that were broken up because, well, if the husband is working and the wife is working, assuming they're even still together, there's no one to take care of the kids, no one to keep an eye on the neighbors, no one to do anything like that. And so no one even knows who they are inside their own family, much less who they are inside their own community. Then there's the whole religious aspect. I've heard people say that there is a war on religion. I only partially agree. I will admit that there are groups out there who are very, very much against the church, especially the Christian church. But that doesn't explain everything. The fact is, people have simply been drifting away from it. Sure, you still have churches, and they still have congregations that maintain communities. I know, I live in an area with like 3 of them on the same street. Trust me, there are still churches that are very, very active. But the point is that they have become much less relevant. People have become less engaged with the church, and as such, the church has become less engaged with the community, and that has further contributed to the dissolve. Now, again, as an atheist, I personally don't have a use for the church when it comes to the whole spiritual aspect. What I do have a use for is the community. I have long since said I don't believe in Jesus Christ, but I do believe his teachings. The ideas of the Ten Commandments, if you look at the Ten Commandments, they are our basis for law. Granted, you will not find anywhere in the law that you should honor thy mother or father. However, we do have laws on stealing. We do have laws on murder. Pretty good stuff there. And there's several other commandments throughout the Bible that have also formed the basis of our laws. And the teachings of Jesus Christ took that even further. Not only did it contribute to laws, but it also contributed to the idea of, how do I want to phrase that? The idea of a moral law, where we should take the spirit of the law sometimes over the word of the law. At any rate, it is the church that gave community. Take the church out, and people had no reason to really gather, no reason to get to know each other, no reason to keep tabs on each other, no reason to work together. I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes people just need a reason. Not everyone is capable of self-motivating and self-directing themselves. Some people do need to be told what to do. And I do mean that the way it sounds, and I also don't mean that the way it sounds. I'm not saying that we need to have a top-down structured society, but what I am saying is that some people need an incentive. And so that's where we are right now, and that's the one thing that I find no one is talking about. We have no community. We have no empathy. We have no cohesion. And those are the reasons why these things have happened in the past, and they will continue to happen today. As I said, that African proverb, a child not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Why is it that every single time one of these shootings happens, it is in a public part of the village? A grocery store, an elementary school, and a medical center. It is a place where the person can do the most damage to the community. Whether they leave a manifesto behind or not, whether they make a speech about it or not, whether they talk about it on YouTube or Facebook or live stream it or whatever, every single time they do this, it is not against a person in general, it is against the community at large. They are doing everything they can to burn down that village. Is it to feel the village's warmth? I don't know. I don't think so. I can only speculate, but there's nothing they're getting out of this, except maybe catharsis. They're certainly not getting love and adoration out of it. Of course, these shooters become reviled and infamous. They are getting attention, and as people will note in many cases of abuse, negative attention is better than no attention. But since many of these shooters don't live through it, I can't imagine it's that either. I have to imagine it is simply catharsis and revenge against the community that has so alienated, ignored, forgotten about. I don't know. But I do know that if we're ever going to have a solution to this problem, it has to come from the ground up. It has to start in the home, from the family, from the neighborhood, from the community, and build itself up from there. You cannot build a castle on sand. You can build a castle out of sand, but that's different. You have to have that foundation, and there is no amount of gun control debate that is going to fix this. Whether you're on the gun control part of it where you want to ban them, or you're on the other side which says that we need to unban everything and arm the teachers. Arming the teachers is not going to stop the gunman from coming. Arming the teachers may stop the gunman when he gets there, but by the time he gets there, it's too late. We need to address the problem while we have options. By the time the gunman gets there, you have to put him down. But before he gets there, can we talk to him? Can we reason? Can we sit him down somewhere? At worst case, can we arrest them and institutionalize them? We need to get ahead of the game and deal with the problem, not the symptom. And make no mistake, all of these public shootings are symptoms. One of the analogies that I really like to use is diabetes, okay? Most people know what diabetes is, and most people say, well, diabetes is a syndrome or a disease or something like that, okay? Because if you're diabetic, you don't process sugar well, and you have to take like insulin and stuff. And if you're a type 1 diabetic, then I'm sorry, you lost the genetic lottery and this doesn't apply to you. Just take your insulin and watch your sugars. But if you're a type 2 diabetic, oh, that's very interesting, because type 2 diabetes can be brought on by a multitude of factors, and the number one reason for type 2 diabetics is diet and lifestyle. And so here's the interesting thing. Diabetes is a disease. It is also a symptom. You can say, I'm diabetic and I have to take these treatments for my condition. Your condition is a symptom of a greater problem, because had you taken care of your body and had you had a proper diet, you would not have had the diabetes that needed to be treated, yes. My brain stopped working for a minute there. So you would not have the diabetes to be treated in the first place. We cannot treat the symptom at the expense of the problem, because to do so is to let the problem remain and run rampant. The same thing is true in other forms of medicine. If somebody has a disease and it's presenting with fever, rash, and a whole other load of things, you can treat the symptoms, but if you do so and ignore the infection in the first place, your patient will die. And that's a really good way to get back to where we are right now as a society. If we do not rebuild our communities, these shootings will continue to happen. And what happens every time it does? We get the gun control debates, we get the mental health debates, we get all of these debates, which do nothing to actually fix anything and only serve to further divide the community. That atomization that's already present is getting worse. If we continue to only address the symptom, we will be killed by the problem. And so this is what I wanted to bring up today. This went longer than I thought it would be. I guess I had more to say on it than I thought. But I'm tired. I'm tired of hearing the gun control debate. I have a gun. I have a gun right there. I think I have put a whole 20 rounds through it, which, being brand new, is probably not enough. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how many rounds I'm supposed to put through it to break it in. However, it's a tool. It sits there every day. It doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. It's a paperweight. You can't blame the tools for this one. And you can't blame mental health for everything. Obviously, these people have mental issues. But the fact that nobody caught it before, nobody tried to do anything before, means that they could have they could have a disease, okay? They could be a carrier of smallpox. And you're still going to blame them for people dying of smallpox if no doctor wanted to treat them? I mean, we've had that before, where we used to exile people from communities because they were plague bearers. But we're not in those times anymore. So it's on us. It's on me. It's on you. We have to fix this problem before it happens again. And not by taking things away from, not by taking the guns away from the guy that lives 2 streets over. Okay? It's by going and talking to the people, getting to know them. Do this. If you don't know your neighbors, talk to them. When you're out mowing the lawn and you see them out and about, wave to them. Strike up a conversation. Say, hi, I've lived here for this many years and I still haven't got your name. Start the conversation. And by doing this, we can rebuild our communities, and maybe, just maybe, the next time one of these people is about to go off the deep end, somebody will know about it before it happens, and the community itself can come together to intervene. It's the only way. It is the only way that's going to work. So I'm going to leave it off there. I hope that's given you something to think about. If it has, then let me know it down in the comments. Leave a like, leave those comments down below. If you know somebody else who really needs to hear this, and as far as I'm concerned, everybody needs to hear this message, share this video with anyone you can get to listen to it. Please. This is the one thing that people are not talking about right now. And it's the most important thing. So please share this video out. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more messages like this. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified every time one of them comes out. And I will see you for the next message that I probably don't want to make. But until then, take care.